Labor Minister skewered by Susanna Reid as GMB clash turns explosive. Susanna Reid just absolutely destroyed a Labor minister live on Good Morning Britain by refusing to let her word salad her way out of explaining another massive U-turn. And watching Heidi Alexander try to pretend mandatory digital ID hasn't been completely ditched, while Susanna repeatedly cuts through the spin with "you're skipping over words here," is the kind of journalistic accountability that makes you want to stand up and applaud. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, and today we're unpacking the explosive GMB clash where Reid systematically dismantled Alexander's attempts to deny Labour's 14th U-turn, why the Transport Secretary's desperate dodging about mandatory versus voluntary ID just proves she's been sent out to defend the indefensible, and whether there's any coming back from being this comprehensively exposed for gaslighting the public about policy reversals. I'm bringing you multiple videos today because watching politicians squirm under actual journalistic scrutiny is both rare and essential in holding government accountable for their catastrophic competence crisis. So let's dive into every moment of this car crash interview, why Reid's refusal to accept spin is exactly what journalism should be, and whether Labour ministers can possibly keep defending U-turns when interviewers won't let them rewrite what their own prime minister said just months ago. All right, so Susanna Reid came out swinging immediately with the most direct question possible. Why was mandatory digital ID a good idea last September and then just a couple months later completely ditched as a bad idea? That's not allowing any room for spin or misdirection. It's forcing the minister to explain the contradiction directly. Good idea then, bad idea now. What changed? It's beautifully simple and completely devastating because there's no good answer. Heidi Alexander's response is textbook political deflection. She starts saying digital ID is still a good idea, trying to remove the mandatory qualifier and shift conversation to whether digital ID concept is sound rather than whether making it mandatory has been reversed. That's classic spin, changing what you're defending to something easier to justify. But Susanna's having none of it. Reid's immediate correction, no, mandatory legal requirement, is perfect journalism. She's not letting Alexander reframe the question or dodge the specific issue. The controversy isn't about digital ID existing as an option. It's about whether it's mandatory. That's the policy that was announced, and that's the policy that's been reversed. Trying to pretend it's about digital ID generally is dishonest, and Reid calls it out instantly. Alexander pressing on trying to explain that government will have mandatory digital right-to-work checks is the next layer of obfuscation. She's shifting from mandatory digital ID to mandatory digital checks, which sound similar but are fundamentally different. Checks being mandatory is different from a specific form of ID being mandatory. She's hoping viewers won't notice the distinction, but Susanna definitely does. Her explanation that eligibility could be demonstrated through digital ID the government provides or through biometric chip on e-visa is the admission buried in word salad. Could be demonstrated through digital ID means it's optional, not mandatory. If there are multiple acceptable ways to verify, then no specific method is mandatory. That's the complete opposite of what Starmer announced, but she's trying to make it sound like continuation rather than reversal. Susanna cutting in with which already exists is catching Alexander trying to claim credit for systems that predate this announcement. E-visas with biometric chips already exist. If those are acceptable verification, then what's new isn't mandatory digital ID, it's just continuing existing verification methods while maybe adding digital ID as another option. That's not the transformative policy Starmer announced, it's status quo with minor additions. Alexander's pivot to attacking the current paper-based system as a complete mishmash is another deflection. The question isn't whether current system needs improvement, it's whether mandatory digital ID policy has been reversed. Criticizing what exists doesn't explain why you've U-turned on your proposed replacement. It's changing the subject from your policy failure to previous system's inadequacy. Her attempt to explain they need to digitize right-to-work checks is cut off by Susanna again, and this interruption is crucial. Reid's not being rude, she's preventing Alexander from running out the clock with tangential explanations that don't address the core question. Politicians trained to filibuster and deflect hate journalists who won't let them, but this is exactly what accountability looks like. Susanna's accusation, "You're skipping over words here," is the key moment that exposes what's happening. Alexander's deliberately omitting mandatory when discussing digital ID because including it would make the U-turn obvious. By skipping that word and talking about digital checks generally, she's trying to obscure that the specific policy of mandatory digital ID has been abandoned. Reid's calling out the linguistic manipulation directly. Her recitation of Starmer's exact words from September is devastating because it removes any ambiguity. The Prime Minister said he wanted to make it very clear that government will make new free digital ID, which will be mandatory for right to work. You will not be able to work without digital ID. Those are unambiguous words that can't be spun or reinterpreted. Mandatory means required. You will not be able to work without it means it's compulsory. There's no wiggle room. Susanna's direct statement, "That has been ditched. It's a U-turn. Another U-turn," is refusing to accept a spin and stating reality plainly. The policy Starmer announced has been abandoned. That's a U-turn. It's one of many U-turns. Alexander can try to word game her way around it, but the facts are clear, and Reid's not letting her escape them. Alexander's insistence they're still having mandatory digital right-to-work checks is the last refuge of the cornered politician. She's clinging to checks are mandatory while abandoning digital ID as mandatory, and hoping conflating the two will confuse matters. But they're different statements. Checks being required is different from a specific form of ID being required. Susanna understands this and won't let it slide. The final exchange where both women end up talking over each other loudly is frustrating for viewers, but revealing about the dynamic. Alexander's ignoring Susanna's attempt to interrupt because she knows if she lets the journalist finish the point, it'll be another exposure of the spin. So she just talks louder and keeps going. Susanna's trying to interrupt because she knows Alexander's not answering the question. Neither can be heard, but the confrontation itself is the story. What makes this interview so significant is its rare example of interviewer not letting politician deflect. Too often, politicians come on morning shows, deliver pre-prepared talking points, dodge difficult questions, and leave without being seriously challenged. Susanna's approach here is what every political interview should be. Identify the key question, don't accept non-answers, correct misstatements, and force engagement with the actual issue. The broader context of labor's U-turn epidemic makes this clash even more important. This is an isolated policy adjustment. It's the 14th major reversal in months. Each time a minister comes on TV to defend or explain a U-turn, they use the same tactics. Minimize the reversal, claim it was always the plan, attack critics for being fixated on details, pivot to attacks on previous government. Susanna's not allowing any of that playbook to work. Ed Balls being co-host is interesting dynamic. He's a former labor minister, so presumably sympathetic to the party's challenges, but he's also a journalist now and knows exactly what Alexander's trying to do because he used to do it himself. The fact that Susanna's leading the questioning suggests she's taking the harder line, while Ed maybe plays good cop, though the transcript doesn't show his contributions. The mandatory versus voluntary distinction is crucial because it's the entire point of the controversy. Voluntary digital ID is fine. Let people opt in if they find it convenient. Mandatory digital ID is authoritarian overreach that requires everyone to carry government-issued identification. Those are fundamentally different policies with different civil liberties implications. Conflating them is dishonest. Alexander's defense that multiple forms of verification will be acceptable completely undermines the original policy. If biometric e-visas are acceptable, if other digital documents work, then what was the point of announcing specifically that you won't be able to work without the new digital ID? Either Starmer was wrong when he said that, or the policy's been changed. Both options are embarrassing, but pretending neither is true is gaslighting the public. Your skipping over words accusation is brilliant because it makes the manipulation visible. Politicians are trained in language that obscures rather than clarifies, dropping key qualifiers like mandatory while keeping other parts of the description is deliberate technique to make reversals sound like continuations. Calling it out forces them to either include the qualifier and admit the reversal, or defend omitting it and look dishonest. The complete mishmash characterization of current system is attacking a straw man. Nobody's defending current paper-based right-to-work verification as perfect. The question is whether the proposed replacement of mandatory digital ID is still policy. Criticizing what exists doesn't explain why you've U-turned on your proposed replacement. It's changing the subject from your policy failure to previous systems' inadequacy. What Susanna's demonstrating is that holding politicians accountable requires persistence and knowledge. You need to know exactly what was said previously, catch attempts to rephrase or reframe, interrupt deflections before they derail conversation, and keep returning to the core question until it's answered. Most interviewers either don't have the knowledge, don't want the confrontation, or run out of time. Reid has all three and uses them effectively.